This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Another round of big weekend events, and boy, what a roller coaster it was for both AEW and WWE, actually. And as you can tell by the subject matter, we have two back-to-back lengthy pay-per-views to recap on today's podcast. So we are not going to waste any time in the intros here. Welcome to the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back and thanks for stopping in again. If you are a new viewer, of course, welcome to the show. And make sure to subscribe, like the show, and leave a comment to share your thoughts and opinions or any discussion you would like to input on the topics at hand for today. We are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for 2 weekly podcasts. We review everything from the classic content to the modern content, and we will continue to make some modifications with the upcoming shows. So make sure to stop back each week and give the show a watch in your spare time. I know we're all busy and we have a lot going on in our lives, but there's always room to dish out an hour to listen to some pro wrestling talk. So why not make the FSWR channel part of your weekly wrestling consumption? As noted, this is going to be another fairly lengthy podcast, so we're going to immediately dive into the reviews here, and we will start at the top with what I watched on Saturday evening with WWE's Clash at the Castle special. Well, that was an easy watch. The one thing I didn't take into consideration, though, was the start time for this show. For some reason, I just figured, I'll sit down for the usual 8 p.m. start time and watch the show like most WWE premium live events. And then I logged on to Peacock, and I saw the replay function for the Clash at the Castle event. And when I realized that the start time was 1 p.m. Eastern time, I was like, oh fuck, that's right. They were in the UK. So the time zones were totally different when this aired. Could have watched this show mid-afternoon and have actually gotten to bed before 11 p.m. Poor planning. But I will at least say this. It was not as trudging and mind-numbing as the AEW pay-per-view from Sunday night. It's not to say it was a perfect show either, but here's the one thing I'll say about WWE. And I can't obviously say the same for the TV shows because I haven't watched Raw or SmackDown in a long time now. We're going to be picking up with the SmackDown reviews for the Monday show this coming week because of the NWA replacement. But the one thing I'll say about these WWE premium specials or whatever they're called, they're usually very easy watches. Yes, the length can sometimes be a little bit of a drag, but on the whole, I usually do not feel emotionally drained like I do coming out of AEW shows, whether it's the pay-per-views or the TV shows. And the one thing I'll say about this particular show is that even though they crossed that 3-hour threshold, and I usually get really antsy once we start hitting that 3-hour mark for a wrestling card, at least this card felt like an actual pay-per-view quality card. And they didn't muddy anything up by trying to force feed more matches onto the show when it really wasn't called for. There were 6 matches, 7 if you count the pre-show, which I didn't watch. All the matches had story and a reason to happen for what I gathered. And even if I wasn't a fan of every single match per se, there were enjoyable moments and things that I could pick out from them that I liked. There were periods where I felt they allotted a little too much time to the matches, but, we can obviously go into more detail about that as we break down the card. So with that said, let's kind of run everything down, and I'll share my overall thoughts on the show at the end, because the main event in particular will kind of encapsulate most of my thoughts. The opening match was Bianca Belair, Alexa Bliss, and Asuka versus Bayley, Dakota Kai, and Io Sky. Somehow I'm starting to think Bayley's faction could use a team name. And immediately from the opening bell, I am also starting to think that Bayley, Dakota, and Io are entirely miscast as heels. Particularly Bayley, who tried desperately for this entire match to get the people to hate her. To say this was an utter failure would probably be understating it. And while we're on the subject of names, I still don't know how I feel about that whole Io Sky rebranding. It did get a laugh out of me during the match where Michael Cole made some very obscure Japanese reference to Io being in a tag team at one point with her sister Mio and apparently some other girl, and they were called Triple Tails. Io and Mio. It's like one step away from child abuse. Were they accompanied to the ring by their older brother, Theo? Maybe managed by their uncle, Leo? Io and Mio. All right, then. Hey, I don't have kids, so what do I know? Perhaps they're twins. Anyway, getting back to the subject of this group for a minute, if you go back and watch my SummerSlam recap, you will remember me expressing some concern about the idea of the group being a heel unit when all three of these girls were once three of the most heavily cheered babyfaces in NXT once upon a time. And I guess to be fair, I would say this was more of a case where the fans babyfaced Bayley and not so much the whole team. Because Io and Dakota were getting some boos in there at various points. But, yeah. I don't know how much this reflects over in the States because the audiences are usually different from wherever they go. But heel Bayley, good idea in theory, but from everything I have ever seen out of WWE trying Bayley as a heel, most of the time I found it to be highly ineffective. I mean, she's much better suited as a face. As a match goes, hit and miss. Didn't take too long for them to break out the series of choreographed six-way spots, one of which included that stupid triple snap suplex spot, which always makes me shake my head. Generally, I'd say it was all right as an opener. It went way too long, but that's par for the course with most modern wrestling matches. There was a considerable amount of blatant spot calling from Bayley, so you could tell she was kind of leading this thing. I wish she would have been a little more covert about it. I mean, there were times where Bayley was literally screaming to her partners to get into position for certain spots, and she didn't even try to mask it. And that's probably more so on Dakota and Io for just not being in the right place, but still, it goes both ways. The weakest link of the bunch was Alexa, who, I mean, it's not that surprising. She's never been a particularly good wrestler to begin with. And God bless her, for as long as she's been around, she hasn't seemed to have gotten a whole lot better since I last saw her. At least she finally ditched the whole weird-ass voodoo shit with the Lily doll. The finish was kind of a mess, and I'm honestly not even sure whose fault it was. Everyone just seemed like they got totally lost here. What happens is Bianca gets Dakota into the KOD position, and they have Io run in to save her. And while Bianca is on the ground, Bayley grabs her hair and basically pins her down to the mat, while she's yelling for Io and Dakota to come in the ring so they can hit all their big moves. Then Bayley pinned Bianca, even though I wasn't entirely sure she was the legal partner to begin with. Like I said, fine opener. A little clunky at times, but I mean, as far as women's standards go, you're probably not going to see a whole lot better in any other wrestling promotion, that's for sure. At the end of the day, I guess the one thing that's yet to really be explained here, and keep in mind, I don't watch Raw, so perhaps there was some kind of explanation after SummerSlam where they talked about it. But what is the backstory with Bayley, Io, and Dakota as a three-person faction? Why are they teaming? I assume Bayley's the ringleader of the group, so what was her reason for bringing back Io and Dakota to team with her? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't Dakota and Io technically not under WWE contracts prior to Hunter bringing them back at SummerSlam? So if the story is Bayley was able to convince management to sign both of them back, what was the purpose for it? Now, I'm not saying they need to have this elaborate 18-month plot to get Bayley, Io, and Dakota back as a faction, but right now it kind of just comes across as one of those WWE booking tropes of let's pair together random people in tag teams or factions because we really don't have anything else creatively for them to do. I mean, they all worked in NXT at one point, so I don't know, maybe the story is Bayley scouted their work while she was on the main roster and she saw something in those two. I'm obviously just spitballing off the top of my head, but I'm hoping there's a little more to it than they're teaming up together because, well, we knew it would get a big pop when they all returned at SummerSlam. Following that, they had a little tribute package to the British Bulldog Bret Hart Intercontinental title match from SummerSlam 92. Funny, because we just reviewed the 1993 SummerSlam last week, and when I saw them air a brief series of highlights for that match, got me thinking, damn, maybe I should have reviewed the 1992 SummerSlam pay-per-view instead. And there are plenty of stories you can read about that match and the preparation that went into it. I'll say this, for someone like myself that never considered myself the biggest Bret Hart fan in the world, it definitely goes to the credit how great of a ring general he was. But obviously that was a nice segue into what was next on the card. We had Sheamus versus not Walter for the Intercontinental Championship. God damn it, Vince. That's all I'm going to say about the rebranding of Walter. God damn it, Vince. Pointlessly renaming and changing guys' gimmicks when it's totally uncalled for. So, Gunther, as we're now referring to him as, hopefully for not long. And God, has that guy trimmed down in the last couple years. He actually has body definition and abs. Good for him. Working hard and hitting the gym. Does wonders for the human body. Of course, you can't say that in modern times because people get offended by it. And I've been a fan of Walter, or Gunther. Sorry, it's going to take a while to get used to. But I've been a big fan of his for as long as I can remember. And I'm old enough to remember those great series of takeover matches he had with Tyler Bate and Ilya Dragunov. I remember he had a great match with Ciampa at one point, too. Jumping ahead in my notes for a minute here, while it's topical, I did like the moment in this match where the fans tried to start a Walter chant, and Michael Cole just casually interjects with, fans obviously remember Gunther's past. His past. Yeah, all of a fucking year ago. So yeah, nothing but good things to say about Gunther Walter. Sheamus is someone I've always kind of gone back and forth with over the years. He's always been a good hand, and he's someone that I would argue has taken a lot of flack from fans over the years, and I think a lot of it just boils down to the WWE syndrome of overexposure. he's another one of those dudes that's been around for years, and he's not someone that when I see him anymore, I naturally get excited to see what he's involved with. Once he got buried by Hunter that one year at WrestleMania, that was sort of the beginning of the end for Sheamus as far as someone you could seriously take as a main eventer. And then, of course, not too long after that, they had him beat Bryan Danielson in 18 seconds, and that really dug him into a grave. Believe it or not, though, the idea of this match on paper actually kind of intrigued me. I figured Sheamus was going to be over like God, and boy, was I proven right in that projection. It was a very good match. Great hoss fight. Looked like two grown adult men actually trying to legitimately beat the shit out of each other. Look more real than most things I see on the other station most weeks. Walter is easily one of the best all-around workers in the business today, hands down. Like, that guy can have a great match with just about anyone he's paired with. He's so versatile in terms of ring style and the different kind of matches he can have. And the thing I've always loved about Walter's match is that everything just looks visually raw with him. I've complained about it before, but part of the problem with WWE's training system is that the boys and the girls they're not really taught how to work anymore. Like, yeah, they're taught the basics and they're taught how to lay out a WWE formatted match. But a lot of the time, because of the people that come through WWE's developmental system are mostly untrained green prospects that don't really understand the business, WWE matches have a very scripted, formulaic pattern now where everyone is so focused on spots and transitions and being in the right place at the right time for the predetermined material they come up with and they lay out before the actual match. When in actuality, what they need to be trained to do is to go in there and call shit on the fly. Learn how to be more natural and raw with everything they do. Will there be slip-ups? Of course. Will there be some noticeable botches? Yeah, absolutely. But, at least when you watch it, it looks more visually appealing, looks more believable as a fight instead of the problem with modern wrestling now where everyone's too focused on the moves. It all just looks like choreographed ballerina dance theater. It's the wrong approach to have. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. But where I was going with that is that Walter's shit looks authentic. He looks legit. His stuff doesn't look faked or scripted or pre-planned or choreographed in any way. He just goes in there, he's going to chop the shit out of you, stomp you, throw you around the ring for a while, and he's going to lay into everything he does. That's the kind of worker I naturally gravitate towards. The kinds of matches where even if it's worked, it's not over-processed to look like a work, if that makes any sense. And that's not to take anything away from Sheamus, with all this rah-rah I'm giving Walter about being such a great talent. Sheamus doesn't really do a whole lot for me in 2022, but I'll never take away from the fact that he's a hard worker, and he always has been. And like I said, if he was someone that just hasn't been so goddamn overexposed for the better part of 12 years, I probably would be more excited to see him more often than not. But when you look at how he's been presented in WWE over the last 4 or 5 years, he hasn't really been pushed or viewed as a main eventer. He's kind of just been a bit player that hangs around. He's involved in some stories every now and then, but I don't know. Is he someone who, when he disappears from TV for extended periods of time, you're sitting there wondering, I wonder what's going on with Sheamus? Wonder what he's up to right now and why he's not being booked on TV. I certainly haven't had that thought in the last decade. But I don't think I'm overrating anything when I say this was by far the best Sheamus match I've seen in probably at least 10 years. I remember he had a series of really good matches with Bryan Danielson in the mid-2010s. He had some fun matches with Claudio when they were doing the whole tag team for a while. But, as far as like a top-notch main event singles level push where I actually saw and viewed Sheamus in that top position, this was high up on that list. And granted, it didn't start off to my liking. With the whole pre-match brawl with the lackeys at ringside. I think Pete Dunne was involved there along with the Imperium guys. or whatever their new names are now. I didn't really pay attention all that much. But, they kept it mostly brief so that once they all got run off to the back, the focus was on Walter and Sheamus for the remainder of the match. And I did kind of chuckle at the visual of the lackeys all brawling and fighting around ringside while Sheamus and Walter just kind of stood there motionless staring at one another. Didn't AEW do a similar thing on their TV show not that long ago where they had a giant mess of a brawl going around ringside while the two guys stood in the ring and just stared at each other, completely ignoring everything else that was going on? As far as the actual layout of the match goes, obviously they were trying to paint Sheamus as the sympathetic babyface here. So he spent a lot of the match taking a beating and getting lacerated across the chest with all those chops. The highlight of the match to me was easily the crowd, because they really played into the story of Sheamus working from underneath for almost the entire match. And that built to a great moment where Sheamus started making his comeback. He gave Walter those clubbing blows to the chest on the apron, and that's when the people really came unglued for this. They had a great dramatic series of near falls that the people ate up, and they had this phenomenal finish where Sheamus sets up for the brogue, but his back gives out on him. So Walter took advantage of that, gave him a power bomb onto his bad back, and almost immediately he just fired back up, let out a giant roar, and then decked Sheamus with probably the best lariat I've ever seen. And that was enough for him to retain and win the match. And you could definitely feel the heartbreak when that pinfall happened. Didn't quite suck the air out of the room like what happened in the main event with Drew and Roman, but yeah, these people really didn't like seeing Sheamus lose, that's for sure. And again, though, maybe it's just because I've been so uninterested in Sheamus for a long time now. I didn't really have any expectations going into the match. I don't know how good or bad the build was for it on TV, but this is a program that I wouldn't mind seeing them revisit at a later date. That now that the guys actually have damn good chemistry together, why not? At least it's a rematch that people would invest in because the first one was so good. It also could have just been circumstantial because where they were live from, but I think a lot of people would probably agree this was easily the best match of the show. And I won't dispute that. This is definitely a match that I would go out of my way to watch again before the end of the year, especially as I'm contemplating my top 20 matches of the year. Not that the list is all that competitive, at least by my books, but major thumbs up to both guys here. Hell of a match. Then we had Liv Morgan and Shayna Baszler for the SmackDown Women's title, which was not a hell of a match. Wasn't horrible or anything, but someone was going to get shackled with having to follow the previous match, so sucks to be Liv and Shayna. And as God is my witness, first off, I love Shayna Baszler. I was a big fan of hers in NXT when she was the champion and she was running roughshod over everyone in the division. She was one of the most authentic and serious workers and talkers on that entire brand. But if there is one thing about her past that I never needed to hear be brought up again for as long as I live, it was the moniker of the submission magician. It was brutally cringe when I heard it 3 years ago, and I heard it here, and I immediately farted at it. Without a doubt, though, seeing Shayna in this spot, the first thing that hit me when I saw the graphic for this match, totally a Hunter call. Because you look at the way Shayna was treated on the main roster when Vince was overseeing things, you'd be lucky to even see Shayna on television, much less get a featured push of any kind. I vaguely remember she was one half of the tag team champions at one point, which, God, is honestly like being rewarded with a participation trophy. I mean, no one cares about those belts, and they never did. But I know for a fact that Hunter was very high on Shayna in NXT, and rightfully so. Because Shayna can actually work, and her shit always looks good. Now, with that said, visually this match looked ridiculous on paper because she had to wrestle Liv Morgan, who's about as intimidating as a fucking newborn puppy. And while I still can't look past the whole botched execution of, Liv cashing in the briefcase and winning the belt in the way that she did, tied in with that garbage match she had with Ronda at the SummerSlam pay-per-view, I like the layout of this match a lot more. I'm not a Liv Morgan fan, and I never have been, but she does have a sympathetic underdog quality to her character, and especially when she's being paired with women that are more physically imposing, it brings out that quality in her matches. The best thing I can say about this is that they played to the strengths of both girls. Shayna's obviously more technically skilled than Liv, so they pretty much had Shayna carry the majority of the offense, and they kind of ran with the heel toys with the babyface until the slip on a banana peel finish where Liv got out of Shayna's carefooted clutch, hit her with a code breaker, and then did some wacky move off the ropes to pin her. Not really that much else to say about it. In my estimation, the wrong girl won because Shayna's undoubtedly the superior talent and worker, but I also understand they're trying to craft a storyline with Liv as the underdog champion, so I can accept it. I do hope we get to see more of Shayna in the future because she was one of my favorite female workers to watch several years ago, alongside Rhea Ripley, of course. She's actually someone I wouldn't mind seeing get a bigger push. Following that, I think this was the point in the show where they showed Adrian Street and Miss Linda in the crowd, which was another fun cameo. Adrian Street. Could talk for hours on that if I wanted to about him. My earliest Adrian Street memory. First time I ever saw him, Mid-South Wrestling in, oh God, I want to get this right, 1984, I believe. And I'll be the first to tell you, when I saw Adrian Street for the first time on Mid-South TV, let's just say it took me a while to warm up to him. I know Corny managed him in Memphis, but I actually didn't see Adrian work in the ring until his run in Mid-South. And I wasn't the biggest fan at first, didn't really get the gimmick or understand how it fit the whole Mid-South region. And all it took was one TV angle with him and Terry Taylor, where he planted a kiss on Terry's lips and stole the TV title from him on a fluke roll-up. And after that, I was sold. I said, yep, that guy's the greatest heel of all time. Seriously, if you've never seen that infamous angle, you got to go find it somewhere. It's the best thing in the history of the territories. Then we had one of the more notable things about the show, this Judgment Day versus Edge Rey Mysterio match, with Dominic ringside to inconspicuously plot his evident heel turn that everyone saw coming. Apparently everyone except the 63,000 fans in Wales, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let me just start by saying this. Maybe I'm totally missing something. Maybe I'm blind to the greatness and genius booking of WWE's creative team in 2022. I don't get this Judgment Day faction, bro. Never mind the several incarnations of group members they've already kind of cycled through. I've seen multiple pre-tapes, multiple video packages and promos from this group in the lead up to their pay-per-view matches. I don't get the gimmick. Like, I get they're a cult, but I don't know, dude. I mean, Edge, I could at least argue, made sense as the front man of the group leading things along, but Finn Balor, I mean, I like Finn and all, but how exactly does he fit into this group? Like, I'm watching Damian, Finn, and Rhea come out to the ring together, and I'm like, yeah, I don't buy the idea that these three would actually hang out in real life. Rhea and Damian, maybe, but Finn included. He just looks like a third-wheel reject that hangs around the group even though nobody actually wants him there. So, I'm still not totally digging this Judgment Day faction or whatever they are. But up until the totally lame-ass, nonsensical finish, I can at least put over how great of workers all four guys are. Priest is so good, dude. He's so good. I wish he were like 10 years younger, because if WWE would have signed that guy in the late 2000s, he could have easily been a world champion for them at some point. I mean, the guy is one of the most underrated workers in the business today, no question. He's big, he's agile, he can talk, he looks like a badass, he's always in the right place. I just wish he were in his late 20s. This is his only faux pas. And I put over Rhea plenty of times. I mean, she's a fucking megastar, and still pisses me off to this day that they jobbed her out to that overrated, overpushed POS Charlotte Flair, who, well, let's just say I'm stewing in the fact that she hasn't been on most of these WWE shows as of late. I'm just counting my blessings now, because I know it's only evident until she returns, but I'm enjoying it while it lasts. Seriously, fuck Charlotte. On the subject of Rhea, obviously she still isn't working, and I know there was that story going around maybe like a month or so ago where apparently she got a concussion or something like that. Is it a little worrisome that we're almost a month out since that news broke and she still hasn't been cleared to get back in the ring yet? Now, granted, she was great at ringside, and, well, I know some people might scoff at the idea of, Dominic being out there by Ray and Edge's side and meant a 3-on-2 advantage babyface situation, to which I say, do you actually think that Dominic could legitimately beat the shit out of Rhea Ripley? No chance. And that's not me simping for Rhea. This is actually one of those truly rare cases in biology where I would actually put money on Rhea beating the crap out of Dominic in a shoot scenario. I mean, God bless Dominic, but he doesn't look like he can whip instant pudding. The MVP of this match was easily Damian Priest. I love the interactions with him and Edge, especially when Priest was on offense over Ray, and they did that spot where Priest spat his gum into Edge's face on the apron, and Edge just kind of looks blankly at him like, when I get tagged in, I'm going to put this motherfucker into a grave. I also loved where Ray and Priest were up on the barricade outside the ring, and Ray crushed Priest on the top of it, and they put the camera on a close-up of Priest where he does the best oversell of groin manipulation you've ever heard. And this match also had a nice series of false finishes at the end, too. I was not a particular fan of the spot at the end where Edge gave Priest the running spear through the ropes out to the floor. Big E did that exact same move time and time again, and not only did the Big E thought not resonate well with me because of the neck thing, it also made me remember that Edge's series of neck problems caused him to retire from the business at one point. Don't do that shit, Edge. There was also a scary moment where Ray gave Balor a Super Rana off the top rope, which I probably could have done without seeing. Not because it was reckless, but I really don't need to be seeing Edge or Ray do this kind of shit to their bodies at their ages. But anyway, let's kind of get into where this whole thing totally fell off the map for me in terms of logic. Because this finish was... Well, let me back up. The initial execution of the finish was fine. It's just everything that happened after the fact didn't make a goddamn lick of sense. The finish sees Dominic trip up Balor behind the ref's back so that Ray could drop kick him into the ropes, hit him with a 619, and then Edge immediately hit him with a spear for the pin. Great finish, crowd went nuts for it, and up until the point we got the big angle after the match, this was all perfectly fine. And then came the swerve. As the babyfaces are celebrating in the ring, and Dominic is standing there congratulating his dad and Edge, and then boom! He gives Edge the knee into the gonads, and Edge goes down like a plank of wood. And of course, Ray's trying to plead and beg for him to think about what he's doing. And that is when Dominic proceeds to give Ray a lariat and damn near take his head off. And, the initial shock of the swerve definitely resonated in the building. But, Dominic, man. Well, before I rush to criticism of it, let me just say, I don't know how good or bad of a promo Dominic is or has been, so provided he does a relatively believable heel promo where he explains everything here, I won't totally poon it into the ground. But facially, he still comes across very wooden and transparent, and even with him turning heel and leaving his dad on the ground, it still didn't look authentic or natural. In fact, I ended up actually laughing at this thing by the end, because the highlight of it by far, the moment I just lost it, I think it was either Corey Graves or Byron Saxon who was sitting there under their breath, somberly noting, well, all we can hope for is that this is just a temporary confusion and that soon Dominic will come to his senses. He kicked a dude in the balls and gave a lariat to his own dad, bro. Seems to me that his mind is made up. Temporary confusion. That was the announcer's final statement on this little angle here. Yeah. So, we'll see. Dominic, God bless the kid. I'm sure he's a mature, lovely human being. Looks like he's got his head screwed on straight, but I've still never been able to get over the fact that he looks like he's 14 years old, and between the limited charisma, the lack of ring experience, the lack of body tone or physique of any kind, I just haven't been able to get behind Dominic. You know, he works hard, you could tell he's trying, but the jury is still out on whether or not he's going to work out in WWE. But above all else, here's my question, and I should probably get back to my whole thought on why I thought this finish was so goddamn stupid. Maybe I'm the only one. Wouldn't be the first time. But if Dominic was going to turn heel on Rey and Edge, why did the Judgment Day lose this match? Why didn't Dominic screw over Rey and Edge before he helped them win the match? Seriously, how stupid does this make the Judgment Day look? They had Dominic fuck them over by costing them the match just so he could turn on his own team after the fact. And then the Judgment Day, well, they seemed to be perfectly all right with this. They were laughing, they were yucking it up, they really didn't seem to give a shit that they lost this match. So that part infuriated me. Whoever came up with that finish ought to be reprimanded. Then we had this Seth Rollins-Matt Riddle match. By the way, Corey did win me back over here with him commenting on the fact that Riddle looked like he was prepping himself for a match at Bikini Bottom. And it looks like Riddle is now farting out fish for his entrance. So, who knows? Maybe he has a new aquatic gimmick that we will see debut on future pay-per-views. Maybe he'll team with Shark Boy. That ought to be a fun pairing. It still was not as absurd as Seth's entrance gear. Now, what about speaks for itself? By the way, I think this was the first time where I noticed the Piggy is a weeb sign. Looks like there is a solid cult of Cornette following in Wales, too. So, maybe it was a reflection of my frustration with the finish in the previous match, but this was the one match on the show where I spent more time watching and observing and less time trying to note-take anything, you know, because there was a lot of stuff that happened in this match, and for me, a lot of it was 50-50 in terms of what I liked and didn't like. First off, I guess we should establish out of the gate, this is supposed to be a pretty heated rivalry. From what I've gathered from that promo package before the match, looks like they've been really milking the personal heat between these two. Kayfabe, obviously, but between the swearing and the brawling, the big angles they've been shooting on TV, I don't know, maybe I was just expecting them to have a different style of match instead of the ordinary, typical WWE match, which is kind of what they ended up having. And they started off by going right after each other, which I liked, but then I look away to type a couple things down, and next thing I know, I look back at the screen, and Seth is hitting Riddle with a fucking suicide tope through the ropes. I'm like, why the hell is this dive spot needed when these two are supposed to have a blood feud? I was also not a particular fan of the spot where Seth gave Riddle a superplex off the top rope, which Riddle then immediately sprang up and hit Seth with a fisherman's buster. Just one of those spots that irks me because it exposes the business. Guy gets hit with a big move and then immediately no-sells it so he can hit his opponent with a big move. And I think where they really lost me, you fast forward to the end where both guys are essentially trading big moves back and forth. There's a point where Seth gave Riddle a German suplex, and then Riddle does that thing where he immediately bounces back up to his feet and charges at Seth to hit another move, and I'm like, I'm torn here because I like both guys, and there were some good moments in this match, but I gotta be fair. If I'm gonna take AEW to task for doing way too much of the back and forth, no-sell spots fest kind of thing, I'm gonna call out WWE for doing virtually the same thing. This was a big move, spectacle, kick out of everything, everyone does 13,000 reversals kind of match. And on general principle, I'm prone to hate these kinds of matches because it represents a lot of what's wrong with modern wrestling. This was certainly way less insulting than what I normally see on AEW programming, but it didn't make it any easier to swallow here. And I gotta be honest, I wasn't really a big fan of the finish they went with here. Now, I'll concede right out of the gate, yes, Seth absolutely needed to win this match. Especially after doing 3 consecutive jobs at Cody earlier in the year and him not winning Money in the Bank. Like, the guy's been on a major string of pay-per-view losses. So I didn't have a problem with Seth going over. I would have put him over. But the whole thing of Riddle losing his temper at the end and trying to hit Seth with a chair, only for Seth to just give him a curb stomp in the ring when he tried to slide back in, and then he immediately hit him with a second stomp from the turnbuckle. I don't know. Generally, I'm not a fan of the heel beating the babyface clean unless the heel is being booked as like a monster powerhouse or something. Seth is supposed to be a Weasley coward. So when you go in there and essentially have Seth beat Riddle clean because he outsmarted the babyface and got inside his head, all it really does is make the babyface look like a moron. So I wasn't really a fan of that. I like the idea of the feud continuing, and like I mentioned, I like both guys. Seth, I haven't been all that high on in a while, and the wacky persona he's sporting now is not really doing it for me. But the guy's always been a hell of a worker, and he usually delivers on these bigger shows. And I know Riddle is an acquired taste for a lot of people. Some people think the gimmick is stupid. I think he's genuinely funny, and he can work too. I've enjoyed a lot of Riddle's matches in the past, so even if he's a little bit quirky, he at least can go. So there's a happy medium there. But there was just something about here that didn't click with me. I don't know if it was just as simple as they had the wrong kind of match for what the story called for, but didn't really feel this one for whatever reason. So at this point, I stepped away for about 10 minutes to do the following things: change in my day attire, brush my teeth, pack my gym bag, and prep my bed. This took me approximately 10 minutes to do so, and when I came back to see how much I missed, they were in the middle of the video package for the Drew Roman title match. Yes, 10 minutes had gone by since the fallout to the Seth Riddle match, and I had essentially missed nothing. And yet they continued to insist on running 3+ hour marathons. I don't get it. But as noted, the main event was Roman Reigns and Drew McIntyre for the undisputed WWE World/Universal Championship, whatever they're calling it these days, the flavor of the month, I guess. I like how I really don't even know what the name of the belt is, yet it's supposed to be their top belt. I also noted Michael Cole's comment during Roman's entrance where he compared Roman coming out without reinforcement from the bloodline to the president coming out to give a speech without Secret Service agents. To which I said, no, because at least Roman wouldn't get lost on his way to the ring. You know, Roman's actually a living person, unlike our president who's been dead since 1969. And of course, my following snide comment in my notes reads, well, they've already cut the fans' balls out from underneath them by not putting Sheamus over Walter when the fans were white hot for Sheamus. Do they try and turn that around by having Drew actually beat Roman for the Universal? Yeah, about that. By the way, I saw that little bit of salt and pepper you're rocking there, Roman. Sporting that good-looking beard. I dig. But as noted, the story they played up here for pretty much the whole match was that Roman was out here without reinforcement. The Usos were not medically cleared. Paul Heyman is still apparently dead after having been put through the announce table at SummerSlam by Brock. They mentioned something about Sami Zayn here. I have no idea how Sami fits into this story, but whatever. But this made for a good story because without the backup, they played up the idea early on that Roman was off his game by basically having to go in there and wrestle a fair fight with Drew. God forbid. So Drew basically had his way with Roman and dominated him for the first several minutes of the match until they did the angle on the floor with Karrion Kross and Scarlett running a distraction from the front row. And I'll admit, the Kross cameo was kind of an unnecessary detraction from the match. Mostly because it was just a random angle they shot 10 minutes into the match, which is only done so Roman could cut off Drew for the heat. Evidently, it ended up kind of spoiling the finish because now you know what Drew's going to be involved with after the show. But as far as I can recall, I don't think Kross did anything or was even ever seen again after that angle. So, did it need to be there? Probably not, but I guess it's just a nitpick. And of course, Roman's a great heel, so he worked over Drew and played to the crowd for a while. Drew probably gave Roman the best headbutt I've ever seen in my life. Came right after that great moment, too, where Roman grabbed the mic and told the Cardiff fans to acknowledge him. Then he turned around and basically ate shit. Kind of talked about this with the Sheamus match, but, if you're looking for an old school main event world title match that you could relate to from back in the day, where there's a clear-cut face and heel that the people are solely behind the entire match and you could actually ride that wave of emotion from beginning to end, this was it. This is a great Flair, Dusty style main event in almost every way imaginable. Overbooking included. They had the spot later on where Roman hit Drew with a spear, conveniently enough after literally having just been speared through the barricade about 20 seconds earlier by Drew. And of course, that was only a 2 count, so Roman got into an argument with Charles Robinson, and that allowed for Drew to hit Roman with the Claymore from behind, but Roman also took Charles out in the process. And at the point they had Austin Theory come out to try and cash in Money in the Bank, only to get sucker punched by Tyson Fury behind the barricade. And then they cut to the ring where Drew caught Roman with a Claymore after Roman tried to use a chair. That would have been the point to go home. The crowd was hot. It was the perfect climax for a finish. The heels all got foiled in their plans to cheat. But of course, Roman kicked out. And the crowd immediately died. And after Drew hits his Claymore again, he goes for the pin attempt. And this time, a hooded man pulls the ref out of the ring. And he reveals himself as Solo Sikoa, who is mostly noted for being the cousin of Roman Reigns / the brothers of the Usos. I had seen very little of his work in NXT right before we quit reviewing late last year, so I'm not all that familiar with where he is right now in terms of development and ring ability, but this is actually a pretty cool swerve in the sense that it played into their overarching story of Roman not having any backup the entire match, only for them to introduce a new character into the fold at the end. Someone who actually happens to be a blood relative of Roman, too. And, of course, while Drew was distracted with Sikoa on the floor, Roman took advantage, hit Drew with a spear again, and got the pin. And unfortunately, at that point, you could just kind of sense the air get sucked out of the crowd entirely. It was a questionable finish to what ended up being a very good main event title match, to say the very least. Actually, kind of a good way to sum up the whole show, right? Overall, a good show with some questionable finish decisions. Oddly enough, in the one match where you ought to probably put the heels over for story purposes, of course, they put the baby faces over when it didn't make a goddamn lick of sense to do so. Of course, I'm talking about the Judgment Day match. In hindsight, would I have probably at least put the IC title on Sheamus just to give the UK fans something memorable for the show? Yeah, probably. The Roman thing is a little more complicated because there's so much intricate story detail that goes into the whole Roman character, where if the idea is to build to Cody being the guy to finally dethrone him as the champion once he comes back from injury, then I mean, yeah, you can't beat Roman right now. Were there ways to book around that for this show? Say if you wanted to do some kind of fuck DQ finish where Drew wins but doesn't walk out with the belt, or, if you wanted to do some kind of double count out or double DQ. I mean, I'm not saying the crowd wouldn't have equally shit on the finish, but I don't know if I would have personally beat Drew by pinfall here. It's one of those finishes that was going to rub people the wrong way no matter what, because the only result that people were going to accept was Drew winning the Universal title. And for the Cardiff fans, I get the frustration. Obviously they have Drew factored into whatever's going on with him and Karrion Kross down the road. It sucks they kind of utilize Drew as a tool here for another Challenger of the Month situation for Roman when Drew is going to be over like fucking God in the arena, but can't go back on it now. Like I said before, I'm not saying it was the wrong finish, but I don't know, maybe one of those deals where if you don't want to do the title switch in the short term just to send the fans home happy, maybe you don't book it in the first place. Again, hindsight is always 20/20 when you look back at it, but if you put me in the creative room and asked for my input, that's probably what I would have said before they even put pen to paper for this match. Is Drew going over? Well, okay. If not, then maybe we shouldn't do the match then, because if we beat Drew in front of his home fan base, it's obviously going to send people home pissed. Unless you have like an angle planned afterwards where Drew puts one over on Roman, or he at least goes over via DQ or something. I mean, it's better than just beating the guy flatter than a plate full of piss like they did here. As far as the whole afterbirth thing with Drew and Tyson Fury getting in the ring and doing their little merry medley sing-along or whatever the fuck that was, I mean, I stopped watching after Roman pinned Drew, so I have no idea what happened here. I heard it was strange, but I guess you could say it was their effort at damage control to try and send the people home somewhat happy. So whether or not it worked, I don't know. You'd have to ask the people in attendance. As a whole, though, I thoroughly enjoyed the show. 6 matches on the card. Everything flowed well. And while I wasn't a fan of everything on the show from top to bottom, and I had my qualms with the booking and things like that, I can definitely sense why WWE seems to have a lot more buzz than AEW does at the moment. You can see those active shifts and changes that are going on with the main roster right now, and the people are tuning in to see it. Doesn't mean everything is perfect, but you can see the effort there and the chance to really turn things around. It's something I can't really say about AEW as a whole right now, and haven't been able to say it about them for a long time. And speaking of such, or am I trolling? Well, just to kind of set the stage for the remainder of the review, I'll go ahead and just give you my general thought on what I thought overall about this show. I didn't hate it. In fact, this was probably one of the better AEW pay-per-view events I've seen in quite a while. Doesn't mean that I would say it was an overall spectacular show, and I had plenty of issues on the show when it came to the booking aspect of things. But would I say it was better than the Forbidden Door pay-per-view they ran earlier this year, or even their Double or Nothing show from May? Most definitely. Now granted, maybe that had to do with me skipping through a couple things on the main card here that I had no vested interest in seeing. Maybe it had to do with the show ending on a positive note with the big return they had, but regardless, this was a more solid effort on AEW's part. And by the way, before we even get into this whole thing, I've got to ask a question about this whole DraftKings deal where people bet money on things for these AEW shows. I'm not even trying to be a tool when I ask this. I'm just trying to be genuine here. Do people actually bet real money on how long a match is going to last? Or who is going to apply the first submission hold in a match? Is that a thing people actually do? Just when you thought you were the biggest loser in the room, never fear. There's always a bigger loser out there. So they opened the show with the casino ladder match. I totally forgot this was a thing. I'm not entirely sure I remember them ever talking about this match on the show in any major capacity. When I saw Wheeler Yuta and Rey Fenix come out first, I remembered, well, yeah, there was that totally random four-way stunt show this past week, and I'm pretty sure Yuta and Phoenix were involved in that. Guess that was their hard sell for what's supposed to be an annual gimmick match for AEW. And of course, my question right out of the gate, why was this a gauntlet ladder match? How on earth was this fair for anyone that had to wait to join the match during the layered entrances? Like, what would have happened if Wheeler Yuta had climbed the ladder in the first minute of the match and grabbed the poker chip? Was everyone else in the match just totally fucked unfairly without ever having been given a chance to compete? Like, especially if you were the Joker entrance for this thing. Like, why would you even want to be the Joker entrant when you're booked to come out last? What good does that do? Now, of course, I think of these questions before they even ring the opening bell, but when these idiots are putting the match together weeks ahead of time, apparently this is never a thought that crosses their mind. Mark booking. What do you want from me? So, well, this sucked. No way around it. The finish was anticlimactic as all get out, even though it was an obvious teaser for what they ended up doing in the main event. My problem more so just came with the actual logistics of the match. Like, never mind, it's the usual car wreck crash dummy session at the backyard dump where everyone's falling off of gimmicks and taking dangerous bumps all over the place. I mean, with the majority of these half-wits in this match, I expect nothing else because most of these guys don't know how to do anything other than this kind of match. I'm disappointed they dragged Claudio into this thing. Figured he would have known better than to subject himself to this catastrophe. Having to work with all the undercard stunt show fucks from Gimmicks R Us. I almost gave up on this entire show the minute I saw Andrade give Yuta that flipping powerbomb off the top of the ladder, and Yuta came within millimeters, not even inches, but millimeters of having his neck snap off the ropes. easily would have been dead on the spot if he landed wrong. And it'll probably happen eventually. The more they do these kinds of matches, it's just the greater the risk. But, I mean, if it is going to happen, I'd rather not be around to see it. I also enjoyed the completely random table bump in this ladder match with Phoenix, where the camera completely missed it the first go-around. It's like every other AEW trope you see where guys have to drop the word shit on TV at least once a week. Someone's always got to go through a table at some point, regardless of whether or not it makes sense to do it. Now, granted, I ended up kind of tuning this match in and out after that ludicrous Yuta bump off the ladder. Trust me when I give you the Cliff's Notes version, they did a lot of shit. You can fill in the gap as to whether or not you thought any of it was good. And then the quirky finish. Well, here's what I'll say about it. Was it anticlimactic? Yeah. Was it completely random and out of left field? Yeah. Did it totally kill the crowd in execution? Oh, fuck yes. That was probably the most comical part about it. Like, you've got all these guys doing dives and reckless bumps all over the place, and by the end, people are left sitting on their hands with this big what the fuck finish they went with. However, if I'm trying to piece the puzzle together here and analyze how they did this, there are ways I can rationalize it. So, first off, it starts with a bunch of masked goons and hoods running down and they start laying waste to everybody. At first, I thought they were bringing back the Aces and Eights 2.0. After having watched an NWA pay-per-view a week ago, that seems to be a trending topic all of a sudden. Plus, I was also listening to some old archives of Brian and Vinny reviewing Impact from a decade ago, and right now I'm in the middle of watching them review the discussion on the Aces and Eights botched storyline. So, anyway, they all come out and wreck shop, and one of the guys climbs up the ladder to pull down the poker chip, and it's Stokely Hathaway. And at first, the fans are all like, huh? And pretty soon after that, all of the guys unmask, and it's the group of guys that Stokely had been handing out his business card to on TV. I think Austin and Colton were in there. I know Morrissey was there. I can't remember whether or not I saw Lee Moriarty, but I think he was one of those guys too. But yeah, those were the hooded individuals. And of course, I always ask the obvious question, why the hell would you go through all the trouble of concealing your identity for a wrestling angle if you're just going to reveal yourself in the same segment? But I get it. It's all for the shock and awe factor. And of course, as soon as the Joker guy comes out in the kabuki mask with the body outfit, I immediately knew who it was. Especially when they got to the deal where Stokely handed him the poker chip and he teased revealing himself, but then he shook his finger at the crowd and walked out. I know those mannerisms anywhere. But, yeah. That was their opening match for this AEW card. Well, main card. A high-intensity stunt show with a bunch of idiots putting their bodies on the line, only for none of it to matter in the end because the energy was completely drained with this wacky swerve finish. This is almost out of the Nitro playbook, actually. We sure Russo's not a consultant for AEW's creative? By the way, if we're being really technical here, yes, since Stokely was the one to physically climb the ladder and grab the poker chip, wouldn't that automatically mean that he gets the title match? Since those are the stipulations? I'm just asking. So after that, we had the finals of the middle school Playmate Circle Jerk session. Oops, I meant the Trios tournament. It's the bottom of the barrel of AEW's roster, and I hate to have to equate Hangman Page into that group, but my God. Watching him come out with those outlaw-looking goofballs in the job order. I mean, he made the Bucks and Omega look like the goddamn Freebirds by comparison. It also took me until the announcers actually mentioned it, where I realized that one of the guys in this match was Alex Reynolds. He has a beard now. No joke, I had no idea who he was. I thought he was Elias at one point. And speaking of that job order faction, boy, are those guys dropping like flies, huh? Who have they lost from that group in the last year? They've lost Cole Cabana. I think that Stu Grayson guy is finally gone. There was another bald guy in that group. His name is escaping me at the moment. I think the Evil Uno guy is still part of that group, but he's injured apparently. Or is it the big guy that's injured? I don't know. I really don't care. The point is, that faction is a complete waste of human life and always has been. Yet 3 years later, it's still going. And I've talked about this before on the Dynamite shows. Everything about this Trios tournament is nothing more than a vanity project for the Bucks and Omega to boost their egos and isolate themselves from anyone that's not part of their little friend group. It's pathetic how they've completely wasted the opportunity to do a real money rubber match with the Bucks and FTR for all the gold. Could have built up to it for this show. Could have been a big money match for them to sell tickets and additional pay-per-view buys, but of course, as we all know, the fragile little egos of the Beta Bucks not wanting to put over FTR and do good business. Well, of course we weren't actually going to get that match. Instead, we had to rush into this stupid Trios tournament to make sure that the Bucks got away from FTR altogether. And I've pretty much disengaged myself from most of this tournament from the beginning, so I had no vested interest in who went over here. I watched it. It kind of played out how a lot of AEW multi-man matches do, where it starts off somewhat coherent with guys at least trying to follow tag rules of some sort. It kind of resembles a wrestling match at times, if you take into account that it's a Bucks Omega match, so the wrestling comment should be taken with a grain of salt. And as the match progresses, it gets more and more nonsensical. Things end up breaking down to the point where you can't keep track of who's legal, and it ends up just becoming a giant clusterfuck of guys hitting moves, nobody selling a thing, and nothing makes sense. Did I sum that up properly? Was that sort of a good visual outline for what went down here? And by the way, God, this fucking narcissistic little bimbo. I love the idea of Matt Jackson pretending to feign a back injury for the whole match, only for him to do every stupid flippy dive and all his usual asinine indie garbage he always does. Not even bothering to sell the back until it's convenient. And of course, he had Excalibur playing up this goofy story during the match with Alex Reynolds having family in attendance, talking about what a big opportunity it would be for him to finally win gold in AEW for the first time. Which is highly ironic to me, because virtually everyone in this company has been walking around with a fucking belt, so I just figured everyone had a championship of some sort, but apparently Reynolds is one of those rare AEW talents who has yet to win a belt of any kind. So, of course, you immediately knew he was losing. And they all did their usual wacky play wrestling spots. They kicked out of everything like they always do. And the finish saw John Silver get a near fall on Omega, coming out of a one-winged angel. And when Silver tried to set up Omega for the buckshot, Omega ducked. Hangman accidentally took out Silver, and Omega pinned Silver. So, good for the Elite. They have their little play toys, and now they can continue to play wrestle with all their indie friends while their niche audience cheers for it. Meanwhile, the rest of us will be over here watching the grown adults at work. So I stepped out of the ring for a few minutes here, and with my non-sponsored Raycon earbuds intact, I was actively listening to the intros for this TBS title match with Jade Cargill and Athena, I believe I heard here that Jade has had 36 matches in 2 years as part of her undefeated streak. Yes, 36 matches in 2 years. No wonder she still sucks. And no matter how many times she changes her hair color, it ain't ever gonna mask how bad she is in the ring. Same goes with her rolling around in toxic waste or whatever that green paint job she had over her body. And this was certainly bad for how little long the match lasted. I missed the first minute or so, and when I walked into the room, what is the first thing I see in this match? I see Athena going for a pinfall attempt on Jade, and the baddies nearly botching their spot of pulling Athena out of the ring before the 3 count. And of course, what does the ref do when the girls interfere blatantly right in front of him? Does he call for the bell and throw the match out? No, of course not. He just lets the match continue. And they did some stuff for a while, and finally Jade beat Athena flat with her double chicken wing finish. So, sucks to be Athena. Think she's regretting signing that AEW contract? Is the grass really greener on the other side like you predicted it would be? I'll bet. Wouldn't be surprised if she becomes another victim of buyer's remorse in AEW. Looks like a lot of these WWE crossovers are. But that's all right, because up next was the 6-man tag with Jay Lethal and the Motor City Machine Guns going up against FTR and Wardlow. There was actually a rare moment here on commentary that I kind of chuckled at. And sure enough, it is during the ring intros where all of the announcers are talking over one another, and Taz, who was trying to actually bring up some story context with Lethal and the Guns, can't even get his point across because people kept interrupting him. So eventually he just gave up and said, fuck it, I'll get to my point later. And for the record, I don't think he ever did. Taz also kept referring to him as Chris Sabian during this match. So either it was a Freudian slip or he just never learned that his real name was Chris Sabin. Speaking of Sabin, man, that guy is unreal. As is Shelley, not to put one guy over the other, but when you think back to Sabin's track record of injuries in the last 10 years, the fact that guy can still move like that is almost unbelievable. You know, Shelley's had some series of injuries he's dealt with too, but oh, fuck. Was it him or was it Sabin that had the 2 back-to-back ACL tears? I remember it was one of them. Like, they tore the one ACL, they came back from injury, and then they immediately tore the other ACL, and they were back on the shelf again. I mean, regardless, though, they still move really well for their ages. And the fact that they came back from all those injuries and they can still go, ridiculous. And you compare this 6-man with that garbage Bucks Omega 6-man 2 matches prior. It's like night and day. It's not to say this is a 5-star classic or anything, but it made sense. There was a formula here where guys were actually tagging in and out. They actually had heat in this match where they were working over the faces at various points. I love the deal where the heels had Cash in the corner and they were working over his leg around the ring post. Just totally out of the Anderson Brothers playbook. And of course, they built up nicely to the big Wardlow comeback at the end where he went in there and wrecked shop for the final few minutes. Ended up going over Lethal with the 4 consecutive power bombs, which, God is my witness, as badly as they botched Wardlow's babyface run in the last few months, the Powerbomb Symphony gimmick is still getting over. I think it's still cooled off significantly since the MJF feud, but there's still something there. Probably the highlight of this whole thing for me was Bryce Remsburg. That guy is always about one step ahead of giving himself a fucking hernia with the way he officiates, but his overacting is so ungodly, horrendous, it's actually kind of comical at this point. Like, his officiating sucks, but I mean, at least he has more redeeming qualities than Rick Knox or whatever the other bald guy's name is. You got to feel for Jay Lethal, though, man. Could that guy get buried any deeper into the core of the earth? Good Lord. I mean, God love the guy. He's willing to put over dudes and be a professional, but man, that guy can't catch a break. One job after another. Poor guy. And I'll say this about the Afterbirth deal. You know, Samoa Joe making his big return here, and even in the odds with the heels when they tease that post-match beatdown, got a big reaction. I have no idea where the hell Joe's been, but I mean, he's not the only victim of guys who randomly show up and disappear in AEW. It was an interesting visual here, seeing a lot of the former TNA stars take center stage. You had Joe, Lethal, the Machine Guns, Dutt. Pretty cool lineup. You know, makes you continue to wonder what the hell Tony's doing with this whole Ring of Honor thing, and if this whole roster of guys ends up being sort of the foundation of that brand. I mean, I certainly wouldn't mind it. Christ, you build a roster around guys like Joe, FTR, and Lethal. Be a hell of a lot more enticing than Dynamite building its roster around the Beta Bucks and Kenny Omega doing all their indie-rific outlaw garbage. The whole thing at the end with Dax's daughter coming out and breaking Sanjay's gimmick pencil and then pinning him with a foot. I mean, it wasn't as preposterous as them trotting out Brody Lee's son on television, but generally, I'm not a fan of them exposing children on wrestling shows in this capacity. I expect she'll be one of the better female wrestlers in the next 20 years if she ends up following in her dad's footsteps, but for right now, I probably could have done without that little angle. Speaking of things I could have done without, they followed that with this Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks match, which is actually one of the matches that I was looking forward to on the card, even though the journey getting there was botched all to hell and came way too soon. And after seeing how they executed this, now I regret having high hopes for it. This is extremely underwhelming. I don't know if they got their time cut, if something previously went too long, or what the hell happened here, but I expected way more than what we got. I mean, they had a hot start with Ricky going right after Hobbs from the opening bell, and pretty much within seconds, Hobbs immediately cut him off and went to the heat. He practically decimated Ricky for the next couple minutes until Ricky tried to fire back on him. And then they do the spot at the end where Ricky runs off the ropes, eats a double A spinebuster from Hobbs, and gets beaten flatter than a pancake. I was like, that's it? That was the payoff for this feud? And look, I talked about this in the WWE review during the Seth Riddle match, where generally, unless it's a monster heel going over the babyface, I'm usually against putting the heel over the babyface clean. You know, Hobbs is definitely the guy that should go over clean if they're trying to bill him as the monster powerhouse heel. But to come at the expense of Ricky Starks after they gave him virtually nothing in the match to begin with, yeah, this just didn't work. Because Ricky's a megastar in the making too, and when this was over, I was left thinking, man, they kind of cut that guy off at the knees. So, I don't know where they go with it, but they got a major booking problem with Ricky Starks if he doesn't come out of this on the better end. And in about the time it took for me to write everything down about that match, it was over, and they pretty much immediately segued into this tag title match with the Acclaimed and Swerve in Our Glory. By the way, side note here, not denying the idea that the number one purchased item on AEW shop right now is the Acclaim's new t-shirt, but all seriousness, is there any occasion where someone would wear a Scissor Me Daddy ass shirt out in public except for an AEW show? I cannot imagine one would partake in daily activities like grocery shopping or walking your dog out in the streets in a scissor me daddy ass t-shirt, I get the sense that it wouldn't go over so well in most public situations. But looking at it in context, most of AEW shop stuff appeals to the lowest common denominator anyway, so guess it's not all that surprising that people are actually buying that shirt. And speaking of the Devils, this was the match on the show where the fans pretty much went into business for themselves and started all the goofy Mark chants that kind of detracted from everything that was going on. Chants that included a "You Can't Scissor" chant to Keith and Strickland, and them doing the "Scissor Me Daddy" chant to the Seven Nation Army theme, or whatever the old pep band song is. I played it in high school in the drum line, but I always forget what the actual name of the song is. And the match itself was actually pretty good, up until the finish, of course. Once the fans started actually healing Keith and Strickland and they started working as heels, it elevated the story of the match tenfold. So for those of you that always say you don't need faces and heels in wrestling, no, you can go stick your tongue in a hot branding iron. The wrong team won, and the AEW crowd sure let Tony know it with all their bullshit chants after it was over. They absolutely killed the crowd dead with putting Keith and Swerve over here, but no, it wouldn't be AEW's only botched finish decision in their 3-year existence. And again, this all circulates back to one of my biggest complaints about modern wrestling today. Nothing builds to a climax anymore, and nobody in the business is smart enough to know when to take the match home. They had several great opportunities to capitalize on that during this match, especially when he got down to the last few minutes where they had that great spot where Caster gave Keith the fantastic Fireman's Carry DVD, then he hit that mic drop on him. Crowd was so electric for it. Would have been a great time to go to the finish. But of course, Keith kicked out. Or the spot a minute later where Keith accidentally gave the shoulder tackle to Swerve into the ropes, and the Acclaimed rolled up Keith for another flash pin. Phenomenal way to end the match. The crowd leapt to their feet with excitement. But of course, Keith kicked out. And with each passing minute, the match kept going, and the champs kept kicking out of the Acclaimed shit. You could tell the people were souring more and more on the match. Because at the end of the day, it's like we talked about with the Drew match or the Sheamus match from the Clash show. The only finish that the fans were going to accept was the Acclaimed going over and winning the straps. It was the only logical finish to go with, and given the way the crowd reacted to everything, well, of course we didn't get it. Instead, they had the champs retain, and the fans totally shit on the finish, and they even shit on the afterbirth where Billy Gunn got in there to do the scissor deal with Keith. Just, again, one of those problems in modern wrestling we see over and over. Good matches with bad finishes and terrible booking decisions. And look, I'll give Tony the benefit of the doubt here. Sometimes you can't always predict how the crowd is going to react to certain guys. Maybe from Tony's perspective, he wanted Keith and Swerve to retain the belts here and had no inclination that the Acclaimed were going to be as over as they was. But there's also value in being able to call an audible when you have situations like this. Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland as the AEW tag champs is whatever. They shouldn't have won the belts to begin with because it was a much better option to run with Ricky Starks and Powerhouse Hobbs, another tag team that the fans were elated to see win the belts, and once again, the wrong call was made. And I get the argument of, well, you don't want to keep hot potatoing the belt because once you do that, the belts start losing prestige. Well, in that case, you should have convinced the Bucks to go over in that three-way and not drop the belts at all so that they could set up the rubber match with FTR where FTR could win the AEW tag belts. That would have been the better way to go. At least that way you could keep the belts on the Bucks for a bit longer to build up to this show. And you're not flipping the titles back and forth between guys. So, yeah, bad finish. Totally took away from what could have ended up being the best match on the show. And I mean, it all boils down to the fault of a green, inexperienced booker of not having vision of foresight or being able to think on his feet. But let me just say this to try and put a positive spin on everything, because I said this is a very good match up until the finish. The Acclaimed. I have been on record saying that they're not really my flavor. I haven't been as high on them as a lot of people have. But they won me over in this match. Anthony Bowens had one of the best sell jobs on the entire show, outside CM Punk in the main event. Max Caster looked the best he's ever looked in the ring from start to finish. The match had ebb and flow. There was real emotional drama in this match. The people were hooked into everything from beginning to end. And Bowens and Caster really showed something here that I have not seen for them on the regular TV shows. You know, the feud with the Guns really didn't click with me because it always just came off to me like another dumb mid-card comedy angle. But you put those two in a real serious program as baby faces, you have them work from underneath, they've got something. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. Take out the lame finish, and I hate to try and give Tony the benefit of the doubt when it comes to capitalizing on guys' momentum, but if he doesn't fuck up with the Acclaimed, that's another set of two homegrown guys that could be a big project for this company in the future. So, not giving up hope, but I'll keep my fingers crossed for them. So at this point, I needed to take a break from everything following the last series of matches. And luckily for me, up next was the 4-way girls match to crown their interim women's world champion. So, worked out in my favor. Double thumbs up, I could walk away from the show and take a break. Who won? I don't know. Probably Tony. I think it was Tony. I saw her holding up the belt at the end, so I presume she went over. Good for her. But that was quite fine with me, because it gave me a little bit of a breather to come back and watch this Christian Cage Jungle Boy match. Air quotes around match for a reason. A feud they have totally butchered in the build-up on TV for a whole variety of reasons, of which we have all discussed in length on the Dynamite Reports. And after seeing everything they've done and how horribly they botched this angle, this is honestly about as fitting of a payoff as they could do. Obviously, we all kind of figured that the dinosaur was going to play a role in this somehow. I just didn't figure it would come before the actual opening bell. What happens is, Christian comes out and does his normal entrance. He ends up getting into a quick encounter with Jungle Boy's mom and sister at ringside. I think it was the mom that ended up slapping him across the face. And that is followed with Jungle Boy coming out, and he goes to the entrance tunnel to try and figure out where Luchasaurus is, because he usually comes out with him. And of course, the big swerve is Luchasaurus coming out from the other side of the stage. He grabs Jungle Boy by the throat and chokeslams him on the grating. And he picks him up over his shoulder and carries him down to ringside, where he ends up throwing him through the timekeeper's table. Second table bump on the show, by the way. Then he throws him back in the ring. Aubrey Edwards does the great oversell of, "Do you want me to start the match, Jungle Boy? I can call this off." And after having just literally been destroyed at ringside, and Aubrey's going to stand there and contemplate whether or not to start the match. What a shitty referee Aubrey is. Not looking out for the health and well-being of a guy that literally just got napalmed at ringside. But they ring the bell, and sure enough, Christian hits him with a spear. Jungle Boy kicks out. And then Christian hits him with the kill switch and pins him. And like I said, considering how fucking abysmal the build to this has been on TV since Jungle Boy came back, this was probably a very fitting payoff. I hate to say it, but I've kind of soured on Jungle Boy in the last several months, and they haven't really done anything with him in this Christian feud to get me back on board with him. He still can't cut a promo. He's still got the charisma of balsa wood. And at the end of the day, the payoff to this actually kind of makes Jungle Boy look like a fucking idiot. He never saw it coming that Luchasaurus was just buying his time waiting to turn on him. That weeks have gone by, yet Luchasaurus has never actually physically gone after Christian in any way. Jungle Boy never pieced any of that together, that maybe they were always in cahoots. Isn't it kind of a general rule in pro wrestling where the goal is to not make the babyface look like a complete and utter moron? Now, Jungle Boy is apparently a complete and utter moron. So obviously the next best thing to do is turn him heel, right? Because I don't know how else you salvage his babyface run. They about killed that dead. But that was that. And Christian going over here was kind of a nice eye-opener into the remainder of the pay-per-view. Of course, not taking into account another match that I skipped over, but as I properly referred to this in my notes, All Elite Wrestling presents AEWWE, where in the final two matches that I watched on this pay-per-view featured the following names: Chris Jericho, Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, and CM Punk. Proceeded with Christian Cage going over one of their supposed four pillars. Homegrown stars. Because AEW is all about that, right? I mean, it makes sense. You know, that's why you put Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland over your young homegrown team of The Acclaimed. Or you have Tony Storm win the interim women's title instead of, I don't know, maybe a Jamie Hayter, who they've also kind of been grooming as a young prospect for a while. But, yeah, fuck that new generation, man. So that took us to this Chris Jericho-Bryan Danielson match. And I think Tony Schiavone's dubbed over commentary in the promo package summed this up perfectly. Hopefully we do not see any involvement from Daniel Garcia. I concurred with it at the time. And we did see him, but thankfully he didn't actually get involved here in any way. And it made the match better because of it. They still fucked up the finish, but we'll tear that apart once we get there. I've said this before, man, and I'll say it again. I think back to all of Chris Jericho's character incarnations he's been through over the years. The best Chris Jericho character is always when he's just being an extension of himself. And he's not trying to go out there and be an over-the-top gimmick every day. When he's just a pro wrestler. When he's pro wrestler Chris Jericho, he's great. And this was great. If they hadn't butchered the booking of both of these guys on television so badly, I would have been more ecstatic to see it headed into the match. Because I know both guys can wrestle. Bryan Danielson's one of the best, if not the single best wrestler in the business today. Sorry to steal Jericho's thunder here, but it's a fact. And they basically had a grassroots 90s All Japan style match. You know, they traded a lot of submissions. They worked a very mat-based style. And I love the little story elements they were playing up here. You know, with Danielson controlling things early on and frustrating Jericho at every turn with all the reversals. I like Danielson's little tribute to Rick Rude in there with the hip swivel when he had Jericho's legs trapped under his feet. And obviously these guys are professional and they know what they're doing, so they actually allowed for the match to build and grow before they started breaking out the more heavy artillery. I like seeing Jericho actually break out the original Lion Tamer. You know, even though they put the camera to a close-up of Danielson's face where you could clearly see Jericho's leg wasn't even coming anywhere close to Danielson's neck, which is the entire gimmick of the Lion Tamer. It's essentially an elevated double-leg Boston Crab where you're applying pressure to the upper back and neck by having your leg pinned against the guy's neck, and Jericho wasn't even putting pressure on the neck. And They really milked the submission holds at the end. That was all well and good. And they ended up running with the heel finish of both guys backing the ref into the corner, but Jericho went low on Danielson, and he hit him with the Judas effect and won. Now, of course, Jericho going over was complete and utter bullshit. No idea why Danielson or Tony Khan signed off on that call. It is the kind of heel finish that I would prefer seeing in most cases because at least it gives the babyface an outing. But again, I have to revert back to the booking of Danielson going into the match. And if Danielson hadn't been booked like garbage since the fallout to the Adam Page feud at the beginning of the year, seeing him lose to Jericho here probably would have sat better with me. But between him losing to Page, getting jobbed out in that garbage-ass arena match at the Double or Nothing pay-per-view, being out with injury for a period of time, only to come back to TV and lose to Daniel fucking Garcia of all people, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Danielson's been booked horribly for the last 6 months. And that is all on Tony Khan for making poor judgment calls and not putting the world title on him when he really had momentum. I mean, what does Jericho going over here accomplish at the end of the day? He already has a win over Danielson. It's the same complaint I had in that stupid barbed wire match he had with Eddie Kingston weeks back. Why did Jericho go over in that match? What was the point? Is Eddie ever going to get his win back? My guess would be probably not. Which in that case makes the finish even dumber. Danielson is not somebody you should be beating on a regular basis. And him doing a job to Jericho after what was such a great technical match here, again, it all circles back to bad judgment calls, bad finishes, poor booking. And I mean, I don't care if Danielson was all right with it. There's no reason why Jericho needed to win this match. Not in the slightest. So, at the end of the day, when I look back at it, it's another good match that was kind of ruined by the bad finish. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, unless Danielson gets his win back over Jericho at some point, but right now I don't have all that high hopes for it. So, as I noted before, I skipped over the semi-main and went right to the Punk Moxley match when I came back. But real quick, I did want to throw this out. I didn't watch the House of Drek versus Miro, Sting, and Daru match for pretty much every reason I've ever given as to why I actively avoid the House of Black segments, period. Speaking of former WWE guys that haven't resonated on AEW, my God, dude. Malachi Black. Actually, since it's topical, now would probably be a good time as any to share my thoughts on what's going on with that whole situation. It's apparently been one of the more interesting stories developing in the last few days for AEW. The rumor I had read was that Malachi had been in negotiations about trying to get out of his contract. I don't know how much of it is true, but judging how this finish went down, I can only assume that there may be something to those rumors. And look, I've gone off on tangents about Malachi before, but for anyone that may have not heard it, I'll go ahead and reiterate it here, because when I look back at true, actual AEW disappointments, like actual missed opportunities, especially when you talk about the WWE crossovers that just fell flat on their face, I mean, I can't think of a bigger wasted opportunity than Malachi Black and AEW. When that guy first showed up and he laid out Cody with that black mask, that was one of the biggest pops AEW has ever had for a debuting talent. Outside Punk and Danielson, of course. Adam Cole got a big pop when he showed up, but Malachi was not too far off from the reaction Cole got. And as badly as AEW has botched and wasted virtually everyone they brought over from WWE, Malachi's run is one that really sticks in my craw. Because when he was in NXT, obviously he went by Aleister Black then, he was one of my favorite wrestlers on that brand for a period of time. In fact, he was my actual favorite wrestler on that brand. Above Cole, above Ciampa, above whoever else they were pushing in that upper echelon of main eventers at that point. Aleister Black was hands down my favorite wrestler on that show to watch. He had a real mystique about the whole silent gimmick that he ran with. He beat everyone on the brand. He was presented and booked like a main eventer. He looked like a badass. And yeah, while he had a lot of similar qualities to his current character right now in AEW, it was toned down significantly when Hunter was overseeing things. They didn't let Malachi get out of control with the Bray Wyatt-inspired, nonsensical, dark psychobabble, and he wasn't out there doing weird-ass pre-tapes in candlelit morgues or wherever he was cutting all those droning promos about God knows what. He was just a soft-spoken, ass-kicking machine that won matches and wrecked everyone in his path. And he started off that way in AEW, but all it took was one job to Cody, and it was all downhill for him after that point. And he never recovered at any point in any key feud he was involved with. In fact, to my recollection, I can't think of any other key notable singles feuds he's been involved with. So I don't know what his contract status is with AEW. If he ends up leaving, I'm ambivalent one way or the other. Quite frankly, even if he went back to WWE, I don't know how excited I could get about that. It's one of those things where the mystique is kind of worn off. Malachi has kind of exposed his true colors when you give him actual creative liberty to come up with his own shit. And I mean, I'm sorry to say it, but he's not good at it. The House of Black shit has sucked from the beginning. And if this was the final send-off for him, then great. I've been over this whole thing for a long time, and I'm ready to move on and never have to speak of anything involving the House of Drek ever again. So let this be the end. So with that all said, let's dive into this main event. CM Punk and Jon Moxley for the AEW World title. The rematch. Where to begin? Well, I'll start with this. For anyone that has not seen my Dynamite reviews over the last couple weeks, highly encourage you go watch my review of their first match. Because that kind of paints the picture of where I stood with everything in this feud after the fact. It was never personally that high on the program to begin with, but Tony essentially booked himself into a corner when he ran with the idea of having an interim world champion with Punk out with the injury. So, of course, he ran with the goddamn oil mechanic as the on-air champion for the last several months, and virtually everything he's been involved with on the TV show has been utter garbage, which evidently represents Moxley's whole gimmick, utter garbage. So, we were going to have to endure this match eventually. Didn't make the pill any easier to swallow once we got there. And here were pretty much my expectations going into this match. They've totally fucked up the feud. And there was really no saving it with the way they booked that whole fiasco on television. So the best thing for my money was to have them go in there and essentially do the exact match they did here. They do some stuff. I accept the fact that Moxley's shit is going to look trashy. Punk will try to make up for it on his end. Punk goes over clean. And they set up to the evident afterbirth that they ended up running with here. All of it panned out pretty much how I envisioned it would. Yeah, the only thing, believe it or not, that didn't actually pan out like I thought it was is that Moxley wasn't the one to bleed in this match. It was actually Punk that got juice. And that actually makes logical sense because Moxley was going to get healed in the match anyway, so babyface is the one that needs to bleed in this kind of circumstance, so that was good. You know, they're obviously playing up the story of Punk's foot injury, so Mox worked that over at various points. My focus was more averted to Punk's elbow, though, because you could tell he was really favoring it at various points in this match. I don't know if it was a stinger or what, but he did a suicide tope way early on in the match where when he came up, he immediately grabbed the elbow and started shaking it off. And as the match went along, he kept grabbing at it, so clearly something was bothering him. I mean, the last thing Punk needs to be dealing with is more injuries, so hopefully it's not a serious thing. But like I said, Mox worked over Punk's injuries in the only way that Mox really knows how to work, which is average at best. And they built to a cool finish where Mox kept trying to give Punk the elbow shots to the head, but Punk ended up fighting through and hoisting up Mox for a GTS. They had Mox hit a Death Rider for a near fall, and after trying to go back to the well with some more elbow shots, Punk basically hit Mox with a GTS into the ropes. Mox fell back onto Punk's shoulders, and then Punk got him up again and hit a third GTS to win. It was the right finish. It did what it needed to do to set up the afterbirth. So, while I'm taking into account that it was a Jon Moxley match, it was fine for what it needed to accomplish. And of course, while Punk is celebrating afterwards, they do the blackout deal in the arena. And they end up doing this really interesting vignette where you hear Tony Khan's audio dubbed over a recorded phone call talking about a guy who was disappointed the fans, let them down. And he promises him that if he comes back to All Out, he will put him in the casino ladder match and give him a bonus pay. And that segued into a cool package where Punk is in the ring from his Ring of Honor days doing his Devil promo. And fast forward a minute later, we see the masked guy reveal himself as the Devil himself. And of course, he throws the patented scarf over his neck. And cue the return of Sir Maxwell Jacob Friedman, who, as I kind of predicted, ended up getting a pretty massive babyface pop, probably because of how greatly he was missed on the TV show. And of course, he comes out to do the stare down with Punk from the stage, ends up signaling that he wants the world title. I also appreciated that even though the fans were cheering him, he made sure to slip the double bird flip off to everyone, saying, "Newsflash, assholes, I'm still a heel." But, look, I'll say this. All seriousness, take out my attempts at satire and trolling the AEW fans. The ending to the show was obviously the more memorable part, and also the most important part. As a whole, there was only really one thing that I wanted out of this show, and it was for them to do almost paint by numbers exactly what they did in the main event. Punk is the new champion, thank God. MJF is back, thank fucking God. Even if God is summoning the devil back himself, at least it's for a good cause. You will hear me say this time and time again, but for anyone that has not heard my Dynamite reviews, I'll just go ahead and refresh your memory. From June of 2022 up until pretty much the go-home show for this all-out pay-per-view, AEW Dynamite has been one of the worst periods of television in company history for them. Between the nonsensical build for the Forbidden Door pay-per-view where all the New Japan guys showed up on TV and completely undermined the rest of the roster, all the injuries that have circulated, the big names and top stars being on the shelf, whether it's Punk and Danielson, MJF being written out in story, Moxley being the goddamn worst world champion in company history, the awful week-to-week booking, all the ongoing backstage drama and issues they have. And it's not to say that's all going to be fixed with a snap of a finger now that MJF is back into the fold and Punk is the champion again, but even the physical sight of seeing MJF back and knowing that his segments are going to be hands down the best part of the shows going forward, I now have something to look forward to. For the better part of a year now, the best things on AEW have been virtually anything involving MJF, no matter what he's involved with. The CM Punk feud late last year and earlier this year, that was great. The Wardlow feud was fantastic, even though they botched the fallout to it. And now that MJF is immediately being factored into the world title equation, I'm at least more cautiously optimistic about the direction of where things are going creatively. I will always be willing to accept the fact that not everything on this show is going to appeal to me. But these last few months for AEW have been an absolute chore to get through because of the fact that everything that I have found good about this product had been yanked away from me for one reason or another. I really haven't had a lot to sink my teeth into for a long time now with this product, but now I have something. It's not a lot, but it's something. And I will take one major assured positive over grasping at straws for anything remotely positive. It's good to have MJF back. It's good to see Punk as the champion again. And now we'll just see how they follow up with things on the TV shows. And before we wrap up for today, go ahead and let me know what you thought of both of these pay-per-view specials, if you watch both of them. There were some good things on both shows. And for the WWE special, one really good thing with that Sheamus Walter match. The All Out show had some good wrestling with a series of bad finishes and bad booking calls, but I can at least be willing to look past some of that with the way they wrap the show up. You know, who'd have ever thought that the devil himself would be the one to ultimately save the day? But lo and behold, he's back into the fold, and now I look forward to seeing how his segments turn out on Dynamite. Anyhow, we'll be back this coming Friday for the follow-up, and we'll also have the continuation of our retro review series, so make sure you stop back and check that out. There were some positives I could take away from both of these shows, but particularly the All Out show. I didn't have high expectations going in, but they gave me something at the end there. So I'll hold out hope. They've hooked me, for lack of better terms. So thumbs up for AEW for that. But until Friday, take care all. Peace.